A few days after my husband's devastating accident, life felt like an endless haze. Grief consumed me, becoming an unwelcome companion, and every corner of the house seemed filled with his lingering presence. The silence was overwhelming, and the sorrow in the air was almost suffocating. It was during this vulnerable time that something unexpected occurred, something I still grapple with to this day. My stepson Ryan had always been a quiet and reserved person. In his early 20s, he carried a maturity beyond his years and shared a close relationship with his father. Although my connection with Ryan had always been polite, it was never particularly close. We respected each other's boundaries, and I never felt the need to be more involved in his life than was necessary. But after the accident, he was the only person I could turn to. While he was also grieving the loss of his father, Ryan carried his sorrow differently, calm on the outside, concealing the turmoil within. One evening, about a week after the funeral, I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the television. The program on the screen blurred into the background as my thoughts drifted to memories of my husband, our shared laughter, arguments, and dreams. A gentle knock at the door broke my reverie. It was Ryan. "Hey, I thought you might need this," he said softly, holding out a mug of tea. His voice was unusually tender, and his eyes held a depth I hadn't noticed before. I murmured a quiet thank you as I took the mug. He sat down beside me, and for the first time since the accident, we had a real conversation, not about my husband, but about how we were coping. His presence brought a surprising comfort, a warmth that seemed to cut through the coldness of grief. He listened intently, his eyes never leaving mine, and his words were gentle, his touch reassuring. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone simply to be there. As the days went by, Ryan began spending more time with me. He cooked meals, helped with household tasks, and made sure I wasn't left alone for too long. It felt as though he was trying to fill the space his father had left behind, but there was something deeper, something unspoken. One night, while we were sitting on the couch watching an old movie, the atmosphere shifted. The space between us seemed to shrink, and the air grew thick with tension. I felt his gaze lingering on me longer than it should have. When I turned to meet his eyes, the intensity in them made my heart rate. "Are you okay?" I asked, breaking the silence. "I don't know how to say this," he said quietly, his voice barely audible, "but I can't stop thinking about you, about us." My chest tightened as my heart pounded. This was my stepson, the child of the man I had loved and lost. Yet here he was, sharing feelings that were as bewildering as they were undeniable. I wanted to push him away, to remind him of how inappropriate this was. But the truth was, I felt it too. The pull, the connection, the spark. That night, everything changed. What began as a hesitant touch grew into something deeper, something I couldn't resist. It was as if all the pain and sadness we carried had transformed into a desperate need for comfort and closeness. We became each other's refuge. finding solace in stolen moments that were both thrilling and forbidden. But with each shared glance and whispered word, the weight of guilt grew heavier. This wasn't just about us. It was about the man we had both loved and lost. Were we dishonoring his memory? Or was this our way of holding on to him, clinging to the parts of him that still lived within us? As the weeks turned to months, our bond deepened. We remained cautious, careful, to keep our feelings hidden from the world. But secrets have a way of unraveling, and it wasn't long before cracks began to appear. Friends and family started noticing the way we interacted, the lingering looks, the way we naturally gravitated toward one another. One evening, Ryan's aunt arrived unexpectedly. She walked in on a moment too intimate to explain, a touch that lasted too long, a look that revealed too much. The confrontation that followed was explosive, filled with accusations and judgment. I felt like a criminal caught in the middle of an unthinkable act. The fallout was chaotic. People chose sides, relationships were strained, and the murmurs of gossip became impossible to ignore. Ryan and I were left with a choice: walk away from each other or face the turmoil together. It wasn't an easy decision, but ultimately, we chose to fight for what we had found, even if it meant risking everything else. Looking back, I'm still not sure I have all the answers. What we shared was born from pain, from a desperate need to heal and find purpose in a world that had lost all sense. Was it right? Was it wrong? I can't say. All I know is that during the darkest period of my life, Ryan was my light, my strength, and my reason to keep going. After the confrontation with Ryan's aunt, everything seemed to unravel. Family dinners stopped. Invitations to gatherings dwindled. And when they did come, they were tinged with suspicion. We were no longer seen as two people mourning a shared loss, but as the subject of whispers and judgmental glances. Despite the growing pressure, Ryan stood firm. He was fiercely protective of what we had, even when I doubted whether we could survive the scrutiny. He would meet my gaze with unwavering eyes and say, "We have already lost so much. I'm not going to lose you two." His resolve gave me strength, though it couldn't fully quiet my fears. The guilt followed me everywhere, a shadow in every quiet moment. I couldn't stop thinking about my late husband, what he would think, how he would feel if he could see us. Sometimes I convinced myself he would understand, that he would want us to find happiness together. Other times, I felt like I was betraying him in the worst way imaginable. The turning point came when Ryan suggested we leave town for a while. "Let's get away," he said one evening as we sat on the back porch, gazing at the stars. "We need space to figure this out without everyone else's opinions." The idea was tempting. The thought of escaping the constant judgment and starting fresh somewhere new felt like a lifeline. But it also felt like running away, as if admitting that what we had wasn't strong enough to endure the outside world. After much thought, we decided to go. We packed a few essentials and drove to a small coastal town a few hours away. It was a place neither of us had been to before, which was exactly the point. We wanted to be somewhere we could just be ourselves, free from the weight of our past. The days we spent there felt surreal, almost like a dream. For the first time since the accident, I felt a sense of calm, and probably many, many others have. For the first time since the accident, I felt a sense of calm. We walked along the beach, talked for hours, and allowed ourselves to imagine a future, one where we weren't defined by our loss or by society's expectations, but reality has a way of catching up with you, no matter how far you go. One morning, as we were having breakfast at a small cafe near the water, I recognized a familiar face at a nearby table. It was one of my late husband's former colleagues. The moment our eyes met, I knew the fragile bubble we'd created was about to burst. Within days, rumors had made their way back to our hometown. The messages began flooding in, some from friends trying to understand, others from family expressing anger and disappointment. The peaceful haven we'd found quickly turned into another battleground. This time, though, I wasn't as shaken. The time we'd spent away had brought me clarity. I realized that what Ryan and I shared was real. While it had been born from pain, it had grown into something genuine and profound. I knew I couldn't keep living my life for the approval of others, not if it meant denying my own happiness. When we returned home, we faced the storm head on. There were painful conversations, tears, and even a few broken relationships. But there were also moments of unexpected support, friends who reminded us that love doesn't always follow the rules, and that sometimes the most unconventional paths lead to the deepest fulfillment. Over time, the noise began to fade. People moved on, as they always do, and Ryan and I built a new normal. It wasn't easy, and there were days when doubts crept back in, but through it all, we had each other, and that was enough. Now, now, when I think of my latest husband, I no longer feel greatness and to release sorrow. New wonderful seats anytime. It's a cry. These clear feed pleasure. Life rarely goes as planned. It's messy, unpredictable, and sometimes forces us to make choices we never imagined facing. But if I've learned anything, it's that love finds us in the most unexpected places, and when it does, we owe it to ourselves to hold on, no matter what others may think. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, or if you'd like to hear more, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Your support means the world to me.